Welcome to Disrupt in Advance and welcome to Blockchain Connect. I'm Mike Wilson, I'm the CEO of Ditto, and I'm one of the hosts and coordinators today. I'm broadcasting live from a stage here in Dublin at Dogpatch Labs with Gareth Mee, CEO and founder of Invenica. I'm going to hand over to Monty, who's moderating today's session. And Monty, take it away.
Hello, everybody. I hope the weather in Dublin's a bit better than the UK. It's pouring with rain here. So hello, welcome to Blockchain Connect. I'm live from my sofa down near Brighton, and you are live from Dogpatch Labs in Dublin. Thank you very much for joining us for our webinar today. A big subject, smart cities, the facts of IoT, obviously Internet of Things, and blockchain, brought to you by Invenica, a company that I've known for a year or so. Very innovative in what they do, and I'm saying that not because I have to, but just because I believe it. They're nice guys. The idea of this webinar, obviously, is for knowledge and for you to learn some things. We're being recorded live. There'll be time for audience questions at the end. I'll kind of brief you on that as we go forward. I'm Monty Montford. I'm the founder of Mob76, is a boutique agency that helps companies helps them make them become famous. A decent track record over the last 9-10 years, a couple of exits. To the extent that recently I've taken a job as a partner, as a venture partner in a VC fund called 7BC, which is based in the Valley and in London. We're raising $200 million, focusing on fintech, AI, blockchain / software infrastructure. I'm happy to take calls, or if any of you know anyone brilliant, we'd love to know about it. I've also been a tech journalist for a number of years and have had a speaking career. My last gig was with Kim Kardashian in Armenia. Yes, I did get the selfie, and I've written widely I still write for The Economist and the BBC Business and Technology, and have contributed to Wired, columnist for Forbes, columnist for Telegraph, MIT Tech Review, Newsweek, the whole lot really. So anyway, enough of me. I know nothing compared to the other guys on this panel. The people that I'm being joined by is David Palmer, is the blockchain lead for IoT at Vodafone. Thomas Spencer, the business development director for Telco Lead R3. Gareth Mee, who is the CEO of Invenica, as previously discussed. And Mike Wilson, the guy that introduced us at the moment, CEO and founder of Ditto, and that's lowercase d. Maybe he can explain that at some stage. So some words of introduction on each of our panel members. David Palmer at Vodafone has worked in the IoT sector for a decade and has been instrumental in the Vodafone business assessment and exploration of blockchain technology and its potential to add value into the IoT ecosystem. I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. Moreover, Thomas Spencer is the industry business unit lead for telecoms at R3. He's been with the company for just over 2 years, leading their engagement with carriers, software vendors, and consortiums across a wide range of user cases. Thirdly, Gareth Mee is responsible for the growth and strategic direction of Invenica, a specialist software services business. He's currently working extensively with the emerging technology space, including AI, blockchain, chatbots, and conversational language, with experience in enterprise integration, mobility, and UX, delivering mission-critical solutions and complex enterprise projects. Finally, Mike Wilson, more than 30 years working at the sharp end, I'm told, of finance, technology, and media globally, based in Asia, the US, and Europe, with RBAT, Winter Partners, UBS, Bankers Trust, and Deutsche Bank. He's been the CEO and founder of lowercase Ditto since 2008, apparently an award-winning marketing, communication, and business strategy practice dedicated to fintech, working across the business lifestyle from startup strategy, investment roadshows, post-funding, go-to-market activation, through to producing multi-million, multi-region product launches and campaigns for Financial Times 100 and Fortune 100 companies. He's helped to bring to market companies such as BMLL, Cobalt, Form 3, Genesis, Illuminate Financial, KX Legarity, Privitar, and Thomson Reuters Electron. So a slightly long introduction, but I'm you know, it's a pleasure and a privilege to be moderating today. And as I said before, thank you for everybody in taking part. And hopefully we'll have some takeaways from the audience. Last thing, just to let you know how it's going to work, I will give a short overview on the topic. The panelists who I previously described will then give their insights into both blockchain and IoT, and what's the reality moving forward and what it means for smart cities. Then there'll be some time for audience questions at the end. So if you have any, please submit into the question form provided for those in the room at Blockchain Connect. That's not something I can see, but you know, it sounds pretty obvious. Please raise your hand when you see the audience Q&A, and then everyone on our panel will do our best to answer the question. Right, well then sum it up with one closing comment each. You know, what's the future going to bring, bearing in mind the world is probably going to end in September this year. Okay, a smart city, what is it? It's an urban area that uses different types of electronic Internet of Things sensors to collect data and then use insights gained from that data to manage assets, resources, and services efficiently. On a personal level, I was a guest of the city of San Diego in California a couple of years ago, and I saw this in action. And I've done similar things in Barcelona and Singapore, so I have an idea of what a smart city is and what it will kind of evolve to be. The panel, I hope, will build on what I've just said. So a smart city includes data collected from citizens, devices, and assets that is processed and analyzed to monitor and manage traffic and transport systems, power plants, utilities, water supply, networks, waste management, crime detection, information systems, schools, libraries, hospitals, other community services, the whole big data aspect. Now that sounds a bit wordy and a bit verbose, I apologize for that. But I'm going to hand it over to David Palmer, who's probably going to talk for around 10 minutes. And he's going to open with IoT capitalizing this market for blockchain and how it all works in kind of layman's language, discuss the maturity of this case, where we are, and more personally, I think, is going to run us through and talk us through some user cases. So David, it's great to meet you. We met on the phone earlier this week. Over to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Monty. I think it's really interesting that we start to talk about smart cities now. What is it? I think you've correctly set that up. What is the key to it is something called data, right? Which is digital gold. Which if we look at it, 75% of the data in organizations isn't utilized, and smart cities are really looking at data automation and trying to bring those things together into improved services and more useful resources or utilization of resources. In terms of what we're doing, we obviously Vodafone provide the connectivity that allows sensors on things in smart cities to provide information which can drive business models. So some of the things that are coming to light now in terms of smart street lights, smart parking, smart supply chain for environmental reasons, digital buildings are all powered by some sort of connectivity, which is our core business. The next stage is obviously to what we call connectivity plus, which is to take that connectivity and the messaging and the data associated with the sensors on these devices and to make meaningful information out of it, which can drive decisions, which can drive efficiency, which can drive ultimately solutions to provide better services for citizens in smart cities. And to do that, we're really looking at how we can drive adoption of this. So one of the barriers to smart city has been the simple cost benefit side. So a lot of investments going in to it. It's hard to set up. It's hard to get adoption across the sort of verticals of water, utility, traffic management. But then what are you getting out of it? Where is the value? And our focus has really been to try and drive the adoption of smart city solutions through our connectivity through the SIM, but also building on that SIM to provide digital identity for devices in smart cities, and also to provide a medium of exchange for data to be transacted. In terms of some of the use cases, I think I've mentioned them. So if you look at smart street lighting, I think that's really good, where you start to see street lighting or the street light asset in a smart city start to be used for identifying issues in the road, to start measuring light, to start driving other data in there, and we're starting to see that come through. But in terms of smart parking, we've done a lot of work where we're starting to marry up some of the research and the pilots done on trying to efficiently drive traffic and parking to where there's spare capacity in the city, but using blockchain as the anchor to automate the transaction of that. And in the future, one of the things we're watching, there's two key things. One of them is 5G. Which obviously provides faster connectivity, lower bandwidth, lower latency connectivity for mobile things. But the other side of the other side of it is where you start marrying 5G with IoT and the blockchain. You start getting use cases where you can start to automate autonomous cars being able to park and pay for the parking automatically because they've got their own digital identity. The car's got its own digital identity. The car is able to initiate a smart contract for the parking. So you've got the smart city. You've got the smart parking solution, which will lead the car to the car park, parking space. But then the car can automatically, using the blockchain, pay for that parking and initiate that. So there's a lot of things that are happening. I think the key to a lot of these solutions will be digital identity married with the data that's coming from the sensors. And I think going forwards, our strategy is really to drive the adoption of this through the SIM card.
Right. Okay. Interesting. The thing that I would say about 5G, though, I mean, I was in the mobile business a number of years ago when there was the 22 million pounds that the government got for 3G, and while I appreciate that 4G has given us things like Spotify and Uber and things like that, what are your thoughts on 5G? I mean, I know that I think you guys launched it at Glastonbury this year. It does seem to me to be one of those businesses that it promises more than it delivers. It sounds like it's an amazing thing that we'll all be connected and smart cities will be run and everything will be the internet. How do you see the state of play with 5G when it comes to smart cities at the moment?
I think it's an important part of the jigsaw, which is starting to come into the mix now. What it provides, as you said, is a lot faster bandwidth, so a lot, at faster speed, at lower latency, and that starts to do a few things. So it starts to bring in the near real time component of transactions and services in smart cities, but also there's some other important things which it makes possible. So with things like autonomous cars, the smart 5G enables what we call autonomous level 4. So it's where autonomous vehicles can start to travel in defined areas by themselves. Yeah, the point of autonomous. But that starts to bring in a lot of things. So drones, other forms of mobility, the whole near real-time exchange of data, which becomes widespread. At the moment, we have that with broadband, but with 5G, that then provides things, i.e. the Internet of Things, with the ability to have a service layer and a transaction layer at speed that doesn't exist already. Some of the use cases for this we can start to anticipate in terms of autonomous vehicles and smart city services exchanging and transacting. But some of these, this capability will give rise to a whole new generation of use cases that we haven't even thought of yet.
How does it work with Vodafone when it comes to the city itself? Do you have to do a deal with Dublin or a deal with San Diego? How does the business case work for what you're trying to do?
Yeah, so a lot of certainly in the UK, a lot of the smart city opportunities are coming via tenders. So we're tending to partner with other complementary service providers to access those opportunities. And obviously we know where our strengths lies, and we're trying to align with other partners who can complement that to provide the services required. And in some cases it's investment. So in some cases it's finding a smart city opportunity, maybe one of the smaller ones that offer us the opportunity to have a proof point that we don't have now, and we invest. So it's a combination of the two routes.
And would you kind of take the lead from a city like Singapore that seems to be quite a way ahead when it comes to smart cities? Is that something you kind of learn from and replicate and try to do, or you do it, or do you do it in a kind of more unique manner?
No, I think I mean, in this technology race that we're in now, I mean, I think it's a combination of trying to learn and feed in the data points from other sort of smart city initiatives. But what we're trying to do is join things up, and I think that's the key thing here, is trying to join up different types of technology. So we started off with M2M, which was about data, going back, empowering internal business models. Now we get to the Internet of Things, where you're having things across ecosystems joining up. What's the next phase? And that leads me on to blockchain, big data, AI, some of these other digital technologies, which when combined with the traditional IoT, start to give rise to a whole new solution set. So when you look at Singapore, there's a lot of emphasis on existing technologies. I think Dubai 2020 are starting to push that and starting to really include things like blockchain and other automotive technologies in their solutions. And we like to take an innovative approach where we're looking at our strengths, we're looking at the data points out there, but we're also trying to innovate, to solve smart city problems we see in the future. So blockchain obviously important in terms of acting as a trust anchor, for smart cities to be able to include other people. I mean, if we look at the example, for example, of energy, and one of the things, I mean, anyone driving around the city, you see a lot of petrol stations. You don't see that many charging stations, right, for electric cars. But the policies are that we're going to see a lot more electric cars coming into the market in the future. So how are we going to charge them? So traditional thinking would be that, yeah, we replace all the petrol stations with charging stations. But is that really the most efficient? Or are we looking at a model where we can include people or what we call edge grid charging stations into that capability? And to do that, you need to incentivize people who may have charging stations in their driveways, or companies who have car parks with charging stations. And if you want to include them, you need to have the means to incentivize them, but also you need a trust anchor which can bring those entities into a dynamic situation so that people can buy energy off them.
Absolutely. I was having this conversation yesterday with a guy that's making a TV show about smart cities, and it might be something that I can put the two of you in touch with, David. He's got some great ideas, and I'm advising for a company in China called Open Motors. So if you think of Uber went straight from business to consumer, they're going business to business. So what their solution for smart cities is to make sure that through battery swapping technology, which Uber used to. Which Uber started with, but then they went straight to consumer, kind of left it behind. It's become a lot less expensive to do so. And Tin Ha, the CEO's over in India at the moment. I mean, India are going absolutely crazy because of the smog problem there in Delhi and their major tier 1 cities. That you wouldn't have thought that maybe. I mean, I've driven in India and I lived there for 2 years, and you don't really want to go on those roads anyway. It would be quite ironic that they would become one of the world's leaders in EVs. So so that was amazing, David. Thank you very much for your very concise commentary there. I'm just going to open this up to the panel now, so we don't all talk too much on our own. Not you, David. You've had a great run here. The other three of you, what are the kind of real life use cases that we're seeing today in IoT and blockchain? And what can we expect in the next 5 years? And I would add to that question, I mean, how would you define blockchain? I've always tried to define it as the British bloodstock racing industry. That three horses came over, Arabian horses in the 17th century, came over to the UK, and now there is this huge industry based on those three horses, where people will spend $2 million on a yearling that's never run. But the reason that they'll do that because they trust this kind of weird blockchain of the progeny of all those horses. And I actually read something the other day that was saying that the Quran was the first example of blockchain, because you could never change the Quran, and people used that as almost a blockchain. So both of those, I think, are a bit obtuse. Maybe hands up first, please. Who's next?
Thomas here, Thomas Spencer from R3. Happy to kind of jump in on on the sort of blockchain point. So first of all, just want to say thanks, Invenica and everyone for setting up this session today. Sorry that I couldn't join in person in Dublin. I would have absolutely loved to come over. I'm sitting here in London. Just as by way of introduction as well, R3, who I work for, we have just opened up an office in Dublin at the start of this year. So we're huge supporters of the blockchain scene there and the growing community within the city. So on that point about blockchain, and I get, as a working for an enterprise blockchain firm, I get at almost any family gathering I go to or dinner party that I'm invited to, as in what exactly do you do and what is a blockchain? And and then I watch quite quickly see people glaze over as soon as I start chatting about it. But essentially, I think that the kind of core the core benefit is one that I'm sure a lot of people listening into this panel will be familiar with, which is enabling trust across inherently non-trusting parties is incredibly important. And that's really the crux of it. Take away the ability to transact value over internationally or anything like that, or disrupting middlemen or taking out third parties. It's at its absolute basics. It's about being able to create a technical platform that can create trust across non-trusting parties. And when you now take that logic into the IoT world, it's about moving that into the edge. And that's a lot of the work that R3 is doing with our partners, is looking about how you can extend that capability into the edge, so that you can now start having much more I guess refined use cases and much more complex environments where you can have devices that are trusting one another when they inherently have no reason to trust one another, because they are owned and operated.
Excuse my ignorance, but could you tell me what the edge is? I mean, if I don't understand that, maybe some others don't know. What does that mean?
No problem. Yeah. So I mean, and when I'm talking about the edge in these scenarios, it's about moving into the kind of computing realm out of your traditional centralized either on-premise data centers or leveraging the cloud, which obviously is a growing part of everyone's infrastructure stack, but now pushing that out to computing infrastructure that is closer to the devices that are actually using that compute capability, and obviously in some scenarios actually on the device itself. So when you start adding these capabilities to devices, it can allow for much more complicated and remarkable capabilities that were not achievable before, especially where you now start having devices that are from being owned and operated and built by different organizations, running under different systems, now being able to trust one another. You can support some very, very interesting use cases.
Could you illuminate on those user cases? Are there any that you can refer to?
Well, I mean, a very classic one is just supply chain tracking, which I use as an example quite a lot because it tends to be one that people can sort of get their head around. So thinking about supply chain tracking really across any industry, could be agriculture, could be shipping, could be retail. It involves, supply chain involves a incredibly complicated mix of organizations, suppliers, vendors, different technologies, different regulations and authorities even. And so there's just an inherent need for lots of people to transact with one another, whether that's transacting in goods, in value, or just in contracts. And so if you now, what we're seeing actually is a lot of those organizations are from different industries. So you might have banks, insurers, trade finance providers, telcos providing connectivity, OEMs providing devices, who all need to start reaching agreements with one another, and they want to be able to do that in a much more fast-paced and cost-efficient and autonomous way. And so being able to use enterprise blockchain, which is the world we work in, to be able to do that, you can do that for things like contracts. So using blockchain for in a relatively, I say traditional, none of this stuff is traditional because it's so new, but in a well understood way would be, okay, let's set up a ledger on a cloud instance. We're going to have two parties take part, join that network, and they're going to start agreeing some contracts with one another. Maybe that's the way that you can start managing your vendor contracts throughout your supply chain. That's a very relatively straightforward first example of using blockchain within the supply chain. And now I've
been quite impressed by TradeLens and IBM's blockchain for shipping. I mean, that seems to me like if you could sort out that logistical problem, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And shipping's been a very early mover within this space. But I think what's really interesting when we're thinking about it in the context of IoT and smart city in particular is how we're seeing a real convergence of industries who are driving that innovation forward. So it's not always happening silos of sectors, like just in shipping or just in agriculture, but in particular, it's funny enough, it's people like insurers who are driving a lot of the innovation because they see the combination of IoT, blockchain, and connectivity being able to support them in providing new services across a range of industries, and that inherently needs collaboration with a wider range of different sectors.
Monty, building that point, Dublin calling, and myself and Gareth would probably like to contribute a couple of points on that first question there. I mean, handing over to
please do.
Gareth and a couple of points, and then I want to be the kind of black cat in the room and not add a dose of cynicism, but this session is about the fact and the fiction of IoT and blockchain. So, Gareth, would you like to go first, and then I'll chip in with my two
pens? I mean, thank you, David. Thank you, Thomas, for those insights. It's fantastic. Actually, we're talking to two companies that are proactively involved in the IoT and blockchain space. I think coming back to, or just to pick on some of the points that both of you made, blockchain, why blockchain? David, I think David encapsulated this perfectly. It's a trust anchor. What does it do? It's a distributed network where people agree on consensus. So ultimately, it's transparent, it's secure, it gives you immutability and provenance, right? So you know that transaction happened and it can't be changed, right? So that's the first point. Why blockchain? I think coming back to to talk about ID, which I'd like to touch on. I think ID is key to this.
Yeah.
And I think blockchain lends itself very well, or I know it lends itself very well to doing that. We as a company are currently working with both commercial entities and government entities to implement or explore the implementation of blockchain for identity. And we've seen it, practical use cases. You take Estonia. Estonia have implemented a blockchain identity solution. And that allows people to do things digitally. So you've seen a complete digital transformation in Estonia. It means I can vote. It means I can poll. It means that I can do things like civil partnerships, for example, online. Why do I need to be vetted? Yeah. So all of those things are practically happening. Vienna is another example where they're implementing the same thing, and you just look at the initiative in Dubai. So those things are happening. But why identity? And the third point that I'd like to pick up on is commerce, right? And if we relate that to a smart city, and really we should be talking about the focal point, which is what I know Mike wants to talk about, which is not the city, it's the citizen. It's you and I, right? So what does, and it's not just blockchain, right? We're talking about convergence, and David touched upon this as well, and Thomas, right? We're talking about convergence between IoT, blockchain, and things like AI, machine learning. And how does that enable the citizen or the city to enable the citizen to be consume services that are more efficient, more economical, more sustainable, and more secure? And those are the things that we should be focusing on. And actually, there are practical use cases. And I will allude to a few more. Mike wants to jump in a moment. We take, maybe you want to pick up on Dublin and the things that happen here.
Yeah, maybe pick up on, so look, that's great. And first of all, Monty, all the guys in the call, great. I'm going to kind of double down just on the question, what are the products and services being developed and where's the smart money being invested? And I'm unsure from an investor perspective and the firms that we work with, launching companies, I'm unsure of the Venn diagram. So we take the Venn diagram of 5G, IoT, and blockchain together and look at the intersection. I'm unsure. I'm unsure if we found a sweet spot use case. It seems like we're trying to find a problem, trying to backdate it in. Now I'm going to talk about our ambitions being greater than bins, bikes, and benches. So I think there is something there. But if I kind of uncouple some of the things there, first of all, Thomas, is fantastic on Vodafone to work with firms talking about blockchain and not mentioning crypto or digital assets or a store of value. So I think the idea of a distributed ledger and mutability is a given. And I think Garrett's point on identity and trust are superb. I think the IBM example is often reeled out, Monty, and it's quite a great one on supply chain management, IoT. I think we see that. But when we put the Venn diagram and say 5G, I'm a little unsure. There's a ton of data and a ton of sense. I'm a little unsure really how Vodafone would make money there. I mean, it's a difficult thing, and they are leading the way. And it's fantastic having David on the call today, but I think Vodafone and the telco carriers are debt laden to buy these frequency ranges, and they need to really rechange their business model. They're not going to make money out of me on a minutes and data bundle. I currently am with 3, and I pay $20 a month to eat as much data as I like. They're not making any money out of me. So I can understand.
David, maybe you could reply.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think, Gareth, you're 100% right. One of the challenges of 5G is that it's a bearer. There's a huge investment to put up the 5G networks and the associated infrastructure. And like many industries, a lot of people in the telco industry, and just to note that telcos are in the process of being transforming to techcos. So what keeps us up at night is looking at the value chain. We understand that connectivity is an important part of that. But also really important is things like application enablement, application services, value-added services on top of that, which is where a lot of the money is. Traditionally, those services have been monopolized by the internet companies, and part of the challenge that we've got is how do we start to provide value-added services and applications on top of 5G. And there's a lot of emphasis on that.
How are you going to make money in reference to Mike's point? You are debt laden, a huge amount of infrastructure investment. How are you going to make money out of it? Is this a long game or a slow game, or how?
I'm not from the finance side, but obviously you've got to take a longer term view to investment. But also telcos, Vodafone and other telcos are investing heavily in the transformation from telco to techco, and on applications and solutions on top of 5G, which is where the revenues are. in the context of smart cities, obviously, you know, part of the issue with a lot of this is adoption. Yeah, and if we look at it, you know, if we look at the two key adopter technologies throughout the world, one of them, you know, we're pretty, you know, we're pretty aware is, you know, internet, right, and social media. I think there's 3 billion over 3 billion social media users out of 7 billion, 7+ billion people in the world. But by far, a bigger penetration is mobile phones. So in terms of mobile phones, smartphones, you know, I think there's over 5 billion mobile phone users in the world. So we already have a customer touch point and a point of adoption and a massive footprint of mobile phones and SIMs, both in consumer, enterprise, and more specifically in the IoT market. One data point is in IoT, we're expecting 70 billion IoT devices to be in operation by 2025. I think that goes up to 100 billion by 2030. And the question is, you know, the question for us in terms of monetization is, how do we leverage that? How do we leverage what we've got? You know, key to that, you know, those devices, a large proportion of those devices have SIM cards. And what we're looking at is how we can provide more value-added services and solutions on top of that connectivity product that the SIM provides, and that's part of the strategy that we've got. I mean, obviously with 3G and 4G, there was a lot of investment there. With 5G, I think the difference is that we're more switched on as to what we need to do in the applications and services side to maximize the monetization from that.
Well, I think it's people need to start buying 5G phones, right?
Monty's gap. I'm just gonna jump in because David's touched on a big point, which is commercialization and monetization, right? And let's relate this back specifically to the concept of smart city, right? Who pays for it? Who invested? So it's great to see that there are governments out there, there are town or city councils that are investing in smart cities, and we see it here in Dublin. There's a number of initiatives. You know, I've just walked past them as I walked into Dogpatch today, which is great, but we perhaps need to accelerate that. I've already touched on Estonia. Estonia's invested heavily in digitization. You look at Dubai and the initiative there. But in order to make this work, it's about how do we get private firms involved, and how do you create an ecosystem to deliver that that service or that consumable service to the smart citizen? Okay, and if you take the case of Dubai, they've invested heavily, but they're working with an ecosystem. That ecosystem involves government and private business to develop services on a platform, right? And that's potentially how the model's going to succeed. You take that a little bit further, and I might be going a bit future state here, but it's making sure that cities work in unison. And there's some initiatives. If you take the FIWARE initiative, I know it's related to data in the EU, but they're working in association with blockchain providers as well. Is how do we create an open standard and a model that allows people to share applications, not just within the city, but from city to city, right?
What's
so
that
almost
called? Does that exist?
You're creating a marketplace ultimately, right?
Yeah, no. Does that exist?
Not currently, no. There's an idea.
If some further examples, maybe for the listeners in the room and online, some other companies doing some interesting stuff and some firms to look at. I'll go from a disruptor a little bit more established in Uber. Check out Dexta, Dexta.io. They're doing great Internet of Things work in the New York subway system. They're owned by DXC, and they're doing great stuff. One click above that is Zego. We were proud to bring Zego to Dublin. They're doing amazing disruptive things in the transient workforce for IoT and insurance. So you think of Deliveroo drivers, and they're ex-Deliveroo guys. And one step up, Ireland's own KX. I mean, KX Streaming Analytics and KDB4 and the streaming data piece is doing amazing things on IoT. And I think this idea of continuous intelligence and control, I think, are the areas that we invested in. It's that idea of a stream of content that's going to capture continuous intelligence and predictive analytics and control, I think, is where you can see from a smart city. But from a smart citizen point, Gareth and David and Thomas and Monty on the call, I think we deserve more than bikes, bins, and benches. You know, I'd like to see the citizen empowered with this trust and seamlessness. I mean, you just look at Bezos' mobile phone and Amazon being hacked by data. I think there's a huge amount of trust issues we have with data, and the fact we're going to give up more data and be pervasive across cities and also citizens, I think that trust needs to be earned even further. Me as a citizen, I think that would be.
Yeah, but that's
point.
the beauty of blockchain, right? Because you don't have to give it all
Yeah,
away.
don't
You
have
give
to
a
give
bit
it
of
all
it away.
No, but I think there is a slightly darker side to this as well. I mean, we know the Chinese face recognition and, you know, all of that. I mean, I was walking down Oxford Street in London 2 weeks ago, and then there was it looked like it's like a building site basically just by Oxford Circus, and it was like face recognition cameras in action. You know, so for the citizen, all of this great, what seems to be, I don't know, very concise way you just said there, bins and benches, Mike, and probably, you know, traffic solutions. How do we kind of combat the negative side of a smart city that you're going to be pictured wherever you go? I mean, unless this is already happening. How do you kind of manage that expectation from the citizen's point of view? Maybe I'll go over to Thomas for that one.
Yeah, thanks, Monty. So I think just to touch on that question, but also then, you know, Mike's comment before on where's the you know, benefit going to be delivered to the citizen, and also the previous question on where's the, you know, smart money being invested. My view on this is that it's very difficult to see the roadmap of how this, you know, technology that's able to create trust and verification is going to be deployed at the individual retail level without, first of all, the frameworks for doing so being set by regulators. So I think that this is actually probably a scenario where at the retail, you know, citizen level, it might have to be done hand in hand with regulators, because they just play such an important part in defining what that framework looks like. So my expectation is actually in the nearer term, in the next sort of 3 to 5 years, you're going to see most of the activity at the enterprise level, at the B2B level. That's where I think it's much more viable for these technologies to be implemented and to start generating economic value and business value within specific use cases. And you can see that happening, whether it's in, you know, being able to improve fleet management, start, you know, automating supply chains, start improving energy management and consumption in particular. You know, anybody who's planning, you know, any big infrastructure work over the next 5 years, they're automatically going to be thinking about how can they use these technologies, which are really just digital enablers. You know, it's no single project is just a blockchain project or just an IoT project or an AI project. It's all about bringing together these digital enablers to support a business outcome. And so I think that's why I think it's more likely that you'll see these things getting deployed in an enterprise scenario.
No, I totally agree. Now, I could listen to this all day long, but I think it might be time for us to get some closing comments. Maybe we can end with you, Thomas. Mike, David, and Gareth, if there's one thing that you'd like the audience to take away from this discussion, try and make it short and sweet. What would that be? I'll give that to you first, Mike.
Yeah, my thing to take for the audience to do is that it's huge, exceptional opportunity. You know, with firms like Vodafone, firms like R3, firms like Invenica, all focus, double down on this, whether it's an enterprise or whether at a community level, they're all grappling to find an answer to the problem. So for a room full of innovators and folk online innovating, there is an exceptional opportunity to solve out here, because we're talking about real life citizen and societal issues. So I would say go hunt that problem, because I know R3, Vodafone, and Invenica, everyone at call are there willing to invest and help you succeed, whether it's in Vodafone's labs or R3's labs or Invenica's work in their labs. So I would say go happy hunt, because if you can get the magic thing at that Venn diagram, 3 things together, the world is full of opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mike. Gareth, your words of wisdom, please.
I think the takeaway is that actually there are some things happening right now, right? They're practical. The technology, and we talk about the technology, and we talk about some future age case studies that perhaps aren't plausible right now, but there are real live projects happening, you know, on an iterative basis, and that's something we can do now and prove value and make money. Mike's right. I think you know, if you take the internet, for example, and the internet evolution, I think we're impatient these days. You know, it took us a long time to learn, but we're learning far quicker with related to the combination of the divergence of emerging technologies. And there are real life use cases today, which is great. Right.
Oh, absolutely. I think maybe smart cities might have to start thinking about investing in masks and keeping us all healthy as well. I don't think anyone saw that black swan coming. It's all right to have sensors, but it's not if you're going to get coronavirus. Maybe this is a wake-up call in another type of way, but that's probably a little bit too weird. David, your final comments, please.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak. I mean, I think these are two really important topics in terms of smart cities, blockchain, and IoT. And I think what the key takeaway is that we're going through a massive period of change. The technical evolution that we're experiencing now is probably unprecedented in the history of man. I mean, you know, and in terms of smart cities, you know, there is a lot of investment, a lot of change happening to try and improve the lives of citizens, but also to try and drive. Yeah, exactly. To try and also improve the efficiency and utilization of our city resources, and how that works. But just to go back to Gareth's point, I think there's a massive opportunity as well for citizens, for startups, for established companies like Vodafone, for companies like R3 and the like to really come together. And I think that's what blockchain does as a trust anchor. Is it allows the automation boundary for organizations to come together to try and solve problems, but also to try and innovate. And I think in this context, you know, it'd be really interesting to maybe follow up, you know, in a year's time, to really look at, you know, where the investment, where the innovations have led to. I know there's a lot of POCs and pilots on the way, but I think what blockchain can add to that, and I think this is evident, is that it can provide you know, the opportunity for people to really come together to bring some of these solutions to light. So from our perspective, you know, really happy to have been a part of this. But yeah, to watch this space. Let's see in a year when we have the 5G, blockchain, IoT, and other digital enablers, as Thomas has mentioned, coming together. You know, what things start to emerge. I think it's exciting times.
Oh, well, I mean, before I ask Thomas for his final comments, the kind of takeaway for me is the fact that you could have smart cities and a platform sharing stuff between each city. I think that is fundamental to the growth of the sector, be that IoT, be that blockchain, a kind of Linux platform where people can, you know, learn from almost a cloud solution. I think these are just early thoughts, but that's the one aspect of this conversation that's excited me. Thomas, over to you. And then I think there may be some questions, Mike, that I can't see. Obviously, maybe you could manage before I make my closing comments. So I'll let Thomas give us a short and sweet conclusion, and then I'll hand it over to Mike for some questions from the audience. And then when you're done, Mike, I'll give some information, and then we'll close off.
Fantastic, thanks, Moni. Glad to know that I don't have to finish off the session. I'll leave all the profound stuff at the end, all the profound insights for you at the end. But I think my you know, for my view on it, and certainly, you know, Mike's experience with all the projects that we've done within R3 is that regardless of what organization you're in, whether you're a startup, you're a large established firm, or you're, you know, a you know, regulatory authority or anything like that, you need to be prepared to collaborate a huge amount. The technology from a blockchain perspective is all about creating, digital trust between organizations, but you can't really get to the stage of trying to implement the technology until you've got the organizations collaborating in the first place. So you can do POCs in small groups, which is fine, or just with single firms, but to actually implement this stuff at a large, meaningful scale, you need to be prepared to collaborate, and that sort of needs to be baked into your thinking from the very start.
Absolutely baked into your thinking. Great phrase, Mike. Maybe you can be the physical avatar of me and see if there's any questions from the audience.
I can indeed. I sure will, Monty. Okay, Monty, I beg your pardon. Hello, good morning, Dublin. How are you? Good morning, hello. Has anyone got any questions? Oh, great, I see your hands here, actually. So my colleague, John, if you just say your name, where you're from, and your question, please.
My name is Shane O'Neill. I'm from Dublin. I think one of the main things that kind of brings people into blockchain is the kind of return to of the ownership of your data, really, and more individuality in the space. And I think the premise of my question is like IoT stands for Internet of Things, and the S stands for security. So like IoT is not essentially secure. And how will blockchain interact with IoT? And in the future, when we're talking about kind of more centralized authorities like Vodafone or even governments kind of taking on the smart cities role, I'm just wondering what your kind of thoughts on that would be in the sense of what I see in the future is sort of a dystopian surveillance state, like China or even London to a certain extent. But it would be interesting to just hear your thoughts on how do we keep privacy at the forefront of this kind of movement.
Yeah, and I think Gareth actually is probably best placed to take that question in terms of a regulatory view and an oversight view, Gareth.
That's a great question, by the way. I think, I mean, it's to touch on this, and I see this actually, I see, and I can see why people would want to question that or ask that question. I mean, you just look at Korea and companies like Hancom that are producing, cities out of a box, effectively underpinned by blockchain. I think there's a lot of work. So in terms of blockchain, and we touched on this already, it certainly provides a network that can provide trust, right? That's a given. It's really how then it's used. And I touched on a point earlier, which was about is the technology ready for every use case? And the answer is no. You take a world that has millions or zillions of devices, all that are communicating, do peer-to-peer transaction. Can blockchain deliver on that right now? No, it can't scale that much. Can it deliver in a financial world for bank transactions or transactions, financial transactions without immediate intermediaries? The answer is yes, it can do that. All right. And then it's really about how you build your ecosystem and how what people are involved in that. I mean, there is an argument to say, if you take a network, for example, a telecoms network, security is in place already, right? So do you need to underpin that with blockchain right now? Probably not. But if you want to transact outside of that network from customers that aren't on a Vodafone network, then yes, use blockchain.
A little more dystopian, though. I think when these companies overtook everything and it's been left to the enterprise to do this and commercial entities, what role does a citizen have? I think as European citizens, we have some protection with our EU data rights, but I think you're absolutely right to be concerned. And I don't think we're woke to it yet. We can just see how social media manipulates elections and stuff. So Monty, I've been told to wrap up, and do we not even time for one more question? I don't think, but no, we do. What we'll do is we'll take these questions for Smart City offline after the session. Monty, would you be so kind?
Okay, well, listen, I've enjoyed this immensely. I like the idea of us all getting back together in a year's time to see if there's any, a layer.
We're ending in September, Monty.
What a year, Monty.
Yeah. See you next year. So anyway, for the benefit of the audience, many thanks to Invenica for bringing this session to market. To the panel, David, Thomas, Mike, and Gareth, round of applause, blah, 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 blah. The series, or the session that you've just been listening to or part of, has been recorded and will be published shortly, and I presume available for anyone that's had the pleasure of listening to us. For any more information or to discuss any of the topics from today, panel's inboxes are always open. Connect with them as much as you like on LinkedIn. Details, I believe, are on screen now. And so it's to me to say till next time, thank you very much for attending. Again, thank you very much for the invitation to moderate such big brains. And I'm looking forward to welcoming you to the next one, clearly, if invited. Have a great day, Dublin, and everyone who's listening.
Great. Let's finish off this.